Good morning, everyone. I am Suzanne Lane. I am the director of Family Star. We are the Family to Family Information Center for the state of Florida. Um, we're wanting to help you look for new ideas for your office to help connect with families of children with special needs. So I'm glad if you were able to join us this morning. We're going to be talking about creating a family-friendly office. We're going to be talking about cultural diversity, disability awareness. We're going to be talking about bridging that gap between rural, minority, and migrant families. We're also going to be talking about caring for the caregiver and tips for reducing that burnout and stress. And at the very end, we're going to be talking about collaborative communication because we know that communication is key to everything that we do. So to start off this morning, I'm going to tell you a little bit about FND, Family Network on Disabilities, part of the umbrella that I am in. Is first and foremost, we do not act as attorneys. We don't represent families and we don't give legal advice. However, we do provide support. FND has been the statewide parent-to-parent since 1985. And so that value of families getting support by networking with other families, it's built into everything that we do. We'll often get calls from parents or other families who need to talk, and we're there to listen. We have been around for over 30 years, and on a yearly basis, we log in over 15,000 calls a year. Most of those are from parents, family members, or professionals who are looking for some information. We also have a very large database of information resources on our website, and a library that it's filled with disability related information. So regardless of that question, our staff will go that extra mile to find that answer. And you're kind of wondering maybe why, right? So I can tell you that 50% of our board of directors are family members of a person with a disabilities. And with our program staff, which is me as well, we are family members of persons with disabilities, and some of us may even have disabilities ourselves. So I walk that walk every day. I have 3 wonderful children, all who have special health care needs, different kinds. One has diabetes, and another has ADHD and PTSD. We have bone density, autism, bipolar. A lot of different things are going on in our family. So for us at FND, Family Network on Disabilities, we walk that walk every day, so we know where you're coming from. So we always strive to identify options. Our philosophy is it's not our role to tell families what to do, but it is our role, however, to inform families of what their options are and encourage them to make the options and decisions that are right for their family. It's a big part of what they're doing. When we're looking at those options, and also so that you know a little bit more about Family Star, it is we're part of the F&D family, but then we're even part of a larger umbrella called Family Voices. And so we are that Family Information Center for the state of Florida, your health information center. And we provide trainings for families, professionals, so that they know a little bit more about the systems and that we need for our children with special health care needs, because they can be very difficult. You can get more information at our website at www.usa.org, and that'll give you our website there. So we're going to be talking about, one of the first things we're going to be talking about today is creating a friendly, family-friendly clinic or front office. We want to look at strategies that actually support family-friendly clinics and talk about action planning. So our goals are to support medical doctors and office staff to increase that interactions with families. Um, we recognizing that characteristics of family-friendly office is important, and also providing you with strategies that support family involvement, and introduce a model for family front office. And with that beginning of developing a family-friendly office, um, we know that families in our communities, they're not alike. We're not all alike, right? And parents seek information and work with front offices in so many different ways. And a lot of times, past experiences will play that key role with parents, and also their comfort levels with the professionals. So, what medical front office staff do really encourage parents to participate in their children's medical appointments and make a difference to that parent's actual participation. And we want to be reaching and involving all parents and families. It's important, and it's when we want to have a true, meaningful family engagement in that healthcare, in our children's healthcare plans. So we want to make sure that the office environment is always very friendly and welcoming. And I know that I've gone into offices sometimes, and they're um, very plain, just a few chairs. And when I've gone into these offices, there's no literature there for me, especially when we were getting newly diagnosed. It was very difficult for us to understand what to do. So a lot of times having information there for families is very useful. It gives it a more friendly, welcoming feeling. Um, because our powers of observation are not always as strong as we think they are. And we might sometimes take for granted the you know the people that when we're observing them. So that communication isn't always clear and frequent. And we need to understand parents are really a part of that healthcare system, and it's very different for that parents want to be able to be a part of that decision-making process. They are a part of that decision-making process, and they have to feel that when they walk into our offices and sit down. So even minor difficult, changes can make it very difficult and hard to maintain that communication. And folks are not always the same. And what's interesting is that differences are always not predictable or readable or observable. And we may have to change some of the ways that we act, we talk, or we behave or think, depending on the parents that are coming into our offices. It's different. Their needs are different. So how do we approach that? And how do we do that? How do we get uh, how do we engage them, involve them? So we want to engage them, and our front office needs to practice and involve our families. And it's really important. It's important for their self-esteem. It's important to be able to get them coming in on a regular basis to be able to support their families. So helping those parents feel welcome is one of the first steps to creating a friendly office. Um, So we want to make sure that we're giving those supports. And part of what we're going to be talking about are some of the differences when we're talking about people that may be coming into our offices. We want to be talking about cultural diversity, um, and how do we work with the families coming in the door as part of that collaborative team, and making sure that it benefits all of the people that it encompasses. We live in such a diverse world, and it's increasingly diverse society in the United States. The diverse society includes a number of people who experience some degree of alienation in offices and doctor visits. And I can tell you, here in the state of Florida, we have over 300 languages that are spoke. So is that we have 300 different cultures that are here, right here in Florida. And so you can see that if we're saying that's so diverse, right? But when we're looking at culture, what is culture? How is it defined? Um, we have we have the definition for culture, but it's also not only culture, but it's the way that our ancestor speaks to, us. So culture working definition is learned traditions, loyalties, beliefs, and customs that guide behavior of a group of people. And so we know that there is a lot of different concepts within that. We have culture, we have cultural pluralism, we have diversity needs to be valued. Oneness is not the same, and we need to be balancing and looking for those commonalities when we're working with people coming into our offices. Also, multiple perspectives and visibility, and being aware of our own stereotypes that we may be projecting out. We are truly all multicultural. It's very important to understand that. We all come here from different walks and backgrounds, so we are really multicultural. Members of many groups have different cultural aspects as well. Not only that, but we have gender and social class and regional and ethnicity and religious, and those are just a few. So the dynamics may change, our loyalties change over time, and it's very complex, right? Culture can be very complex. And so our groups may actually overlap each other, and being aware of those cultural elements when we're looking at this overlap, we need to be respectful of those. We need to look at those values and the beliefs and the customs and traditions, language and communication patterns. They may have different diet and food preparation. Dress or body decoration may look quite different. Religious practices look very different among different religious groups. Our family structures are different depending on what our cultural background is. And the view of time, the concept of time, the view of time may really vary. And recreational athletic games, depending on where we're coming from, what is our background, all of those can be so different. So what is diversity, right? What is diversity? We've talked about cultural. So cultural diversity refers to that wide range of cultural differences found between and within nations. So when we look around us, when we go into a doctor's office, we can look and we can see so much cultural diversity. You can see that. What about within your family? Is there a cultural diversity? I know that in my family, there definitely is cultural diversity. My mother and I came from France originally, and so within our own family, there's cultural differences. And my father was an American, so it looks so different, and we blended those cultures together. So there's a lot of value to that diversity. It's not a deficit. It's not even a tolerance. It's a strength. It brings a lot of times, it brings that harmony, togetherness, bringing it together. So diversity, it's all about equality, civil rights, and social justice. I mean, after all, it is included in our founding documents. And it's a part of everything that we do. Diversity is so important. And then we have positive adaptation. So we've learned different ways. Democracy is made when many points of views are listened to. That's what our democracy is all about. When we're looking at cultural diversity in healthcare, we're looking at with caregivers, we're wanting to make for caregivers, we want to make it better. We want to give the control over nature. We want to do something as a caregiver. We want to intervene now. We want to have strong measures in place. We need to plan ahead. And what's recent is best. We want to standardize. We want to treat everyone the same as caregivers. Families want to be accepted with grace. They want balance and harmony with nature. We want to wait and see what happens. We may be cautious, but in a deliberate way. Because remember, when we go back to previous experiences can make us very cautious. We may have a gentle approach to life. We may take it as it comes, time honored. And we need to recognize the differences, a big piece. So, oneness is not sameness and balance between commonalities. We have to have a balance and act. Different is yes, but it's not more in common. So we do have to balance out, what does it look like? How do we do this? So we may have situations where we need to recognize what some of those, or know, and it can always help if we ask folks a little bit about their culture and their background. So families have goals of seeing themselves, including things like they want to improve open communication and trust. We want to eliminate biases in the medical offices and interactions, and learning that medical language sometimes can be very difficult. So these are goals that families can have, incorporating minority perspectives into all aspects of communication. It's very important because we do want to foster that respect and appreciation and contributions. Uh, it's very, very important. So sometimes we need to be working with interpreters, and we're looking at what are some qualifications that we may need for interpreters. Um, Bilingual, doing bicultural, understanding of the English medical vocabulary, because if we're going to be working with them in our offices and we need someone to help us translate, they do need to understand our job and as medical professionals, that vocabulary. And they need to be comfortable in that medical setting and understanding the significance of health problems. Also, preserving confidentiality is very, very important. So, in working with our interpreters, we want to use that language to identify the interpreter as that go in between, but not as the person to be blamed. Oh, the interpreter might have said something different. The doctor has ordered tests, and this is what he said. Um, we want them to interpret what is there. So, translation factors when we're working with those interpreters is the language. How are new words created? So, can we minimize jargon? Can we say the machine will take a look at your heart instead of this? We're going to do an EKG. So, when we're working with families, and remember that non-verbal communication, it's 60% of all communication. So, their nodding may indicate politeness, but not comprehension. Bilingual in interviewing also takes twice as long as monologue interviews. So it's very important to make sure that we do have that time to be able to work with the families. And how do we create that caretaker's responsibilities levels? We need to learn. Can we learn a few phrases of a greeting and introduction in that patient's native language? This conveys that respect and demonstrates willingness to learn about their culture. Words such as, I'm trying to think, such as gomenasai, I'm sorry in Japanese, konnichiwa, hello, are very, it can enlighten someone and put a smile on their face, because we may not be saying it in the way, but it lets them know that we're trying to understand them. A very important piece. Caregivers' responsibilities. So in some cultures, it may not be appropriate to suggest or making a will for a dying patient or a patient with a terminal illness. This is the cultural equivalent of wishing death on a patient. So you can see that if you're doing something like this, you can really put a wedge in there. So avoid saying you must. Instead, teach their patients their options and let them decide, what it is that would help with that situation. Let them try to help decide. Cultural diversity it truly does, start with awareness, and it grows with knowledge. And we can really enhance with specific skills, and it can be polished through cross-cultural encounters. The more that we meet other people um, of different languages, from different backgrounds, we learn that cultural diversity. And that's always fun. I don't know. For me, it is anyway. Is learning new things all the time is always very helpful. Um, so cultural diversity in healthcare is very, very critical. And it's because we're all different in that each of us are so very, very special. So we want to continue looking and reaching out to families, um, and talking about in our with our staff, and talking about cultural awareness, but also disability awareness. That leads us into our third conversation on disability awareness. I'm going to take a sip here for just a second because I don't know if you can hear, I've got this raspy voice going. So we do want to talk about a little bit more about that disability awareness, because when not only do we have folks that come in, that we can see that there may be a language barrier, that we can hear that there's maybe a language barrier, but then is there the cultural barrier, disability, the disability itself. We need to be aware of what it is. We need to clear up. Part of the importance of that disability awareness is to kind of clear up any assumptions or misconceptions. In educating society, oh my goodness, as a parent of a child with disabilities, sometimes I feel like I'm always trying to educate society. And the knowledge of that first person first language, very, very important for equality and respect. Really important terms to really know in the disability world, and to become really aware, is the word disability and functional limitation, handicap, ADA. What does that all mean to us? Let's first talk about first language, person first language. So I'm going to give some examples. So instead of the disabled, the handicapped, the crippled, say something such as a person with a disability. It's really important, if we're talking about a person who's relying on a wheelchair, we don't want to say that they're wheelchair bound. We want to say that a person relies on a wheelchair. Instead of saying things such as they suffer, or they're a victim of, they're afflicted or stricken with, say a person with Alzheimer's, a person with diabetes. Another really key one, and it's a very hard one. Instead of saying the normal person, say able-bodied or non-disabled. We're taking away some of those labels there. So instead of saying crazy or nuts, let's say person with a mental health condition. These are person first language. It allows people with disabilities their dignity, and there's disability etiquette, treating people with disabilities like everyone else. So asking before you help, and asking, do you need assistance, is very important. Because if I've learned anything from my children, is that there have been times when I've wanted to help them, especially as mom. I really want to help. And they don't need that help. They can do it for themselves. And, a lot of times we need to ask is, do you need assistance? Because when I see someone who is in a wheelchair and is bending over and trying to pick up books that the books just fell, and I'm giving actually that example from my child when he was in a wheelchair with 2 broken legs. So, he was bending over to get the books. And I immediately, as mom, I'm just super mom, so I jumped down and I'm picking up the books for him. And he got very upset. I can do this. So it was really kind of a learning factor for me, because it was like, I really do need to ask people, do they need assistance? And people will tell you, yes, I do, or no, I've got this. I've learned, I can open this door without a problem. And speaking directly to a person with a disability, not to the caregiver, um, or the sign language interpreter, or whoever they're with. People with disabilities are not just a disability. And be mindful that some people may have a hidden disability, therefore a handicap parking sticker could be justified, and you just don't know that. I want to kind of go back to talking directly to a person with a disability, and I'm going to give you an example of something that I learned very young. It's just a story. My mom, and I try not to do too many stories. I'm not much of a storyteller. I'm pretty straightforward all the time. But this one really spoke volumes to me very young. I don't know, I think I was about, 21, 22 years old. And I had gone to the dentist, and I'd had some dental work done. And of course, you know how when you get a root canal, you're all numb and everything's numb. And I had taken some very strong medications, and I was in the passenger seat, and I went to get out of the car. And I did this before my mother was able to come around the other side of the car and get me, being, hey, I'm getting out of the car, right? What could be safer than that? Well, what I did was I slammed the door, and then I tried to jerk my purse out, only to realize it wasn't my purse, it was my hand. So here I am with my hand stuck in the door, and I'm screaming from pain. To make the story a little bit shorter, so there's my hand all bloody. My mother wraps it up the best she can, and we're off again, back in the car, and she's refusing to let me move. And I'm tears busting down. I can't say anything because I have my mouth still full of gauze. It was pretty bad. We get to the hospital, and she, of course, with due diligence, and at this point, I'm not moving anywhere. My hand is up here, and I'm holding on to it. I'm in a lot of pain. So we go in there into the ER, and we're standing there at the counter, and she says, "Can I help you?" And I go, I couldn't talk. My mouth had still gauze in it. I was numb as could be, and there's blood going all over. And so she turns and looks at my mother, and she says, "Oh, I see. The poor dear got hurt." Okay. And at that point, I'm like, I am so upset, because she continued to talk to my mother and not me. Now, she assumed that I had, some sort of disability, but she wasn't treating me with any respect as a human being. She didn't ask me for my ID. She looked at my mother and she says, "You do have her identification with you, don't you?" I was shocked and appalled. So you can see that sometimes you get into these situations where we need to be directly speaking to the person with the disability, even if we can't understand them. We need to do that, because they need respect and dignity. Believe me, my dignity had been walked over that day left and right because of my foolishness of trying to get out of the car on my own. So when medicated, don't get on the car without some assistance. So I want to talk a little bit about people who use wheelchairs or have mobility impairments. Some of those don'ts, right? We don't want to lean over to shake another person's hands, right? We don't want to rely on them to hold items for you just because they're sitting down and can have it in their lap. And again, I can go into examples of that. We're at SeaWorld. My son has 2 broken legs. He's in the wheelchair, and his friends are wanting to push everything into his lap because he's sitting. But if he wants to get out and try to move around some, even with his 2 broken legs, he wouldn't have been able to do that. So don't touch or push a wheelchair unless that person asks you to or gives specific directions. You could dump someone out of their chair or even break it. So don't lean down or lean on them. Those are some of the don'ts. So let's talk about some of the do's for folks that have mobility impairments. Some of the do's might keep all accessible doors with ramps or electric doors unlocked and unblocked, keeping paths clear so the wheelchair can navigate safely, keeping in mind, keeping items they may need within their reach. So instead of putting things on the floor, put them up on the counter where they're able to have access to them. So make directions clear to accessible routes through the building, such as elevators, ramps, or automatic doors. Very important for those that have mobility issues. Some courtesy for people who are blind or visually impaired they're ordinary people. They're just blind or visually impaired. You don't need to raise your voice to address them as if they were a child. They may take a long white cane or a guide dog to walk independently, or they may just take your arm. Let them make that decision if they want to take your arm. This will keep, and they'll always keep a half step behind. You want to do that to anticipate curbs or steps. So avoid words like they use them to, they're always glad to see you. Their sense of smell, taste, or touch or hearing did not improve because they became blind. They rely on them more, and therefore they may get more information through those senses than sighted people do. And I was never around folks that were blind or visually impaired until I became a part of Partners in Policymaking in the state of Tennessee. And there were several people in our group that were blind and visually impaired. And it was such an experience with them because those words that we use are so important. But not only that, but watching PowerPoint presentations or watching a movie, they couldn't visually see what was going on in the movie. So we had the opportunity to work one-on-one and buddy up in system and help each other out. And it was such a pleasure to be able to interpret what I was seeing on the big screen for some of those friends that I've made during that class time. So it does look, we need to give, notice that people are just like us and we just rely on things differently. We use our strengths. We rely on our strengths. So when we're talking about also people with speech disabilities, we really need to give the person your full attention. Just like when we were speaking with people with different cultures, we need to give that full attention. And just because they have speech difficulties, we don't want to be finishing their sentence or thoughts. I mean, think about that for just a minute. If I were having a conversation with my friend and they needed a moment to think and I'm finishing it for them, how rude is that? And if you don't understand, it's okay to ask them to repeat or clarify, but don't interrupt. Don't interrupt them. We all know that we get in such a hurry in this world. We have such a we want everything quickly done and done correctly and fast. And sometimes we need to give them an opportunity and not interrupt. So if you're not sure whether you understood, you can repeat back, what they've said, and that allows them. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that because it's an important piece of communication and confirm that they really did understand you. It's a very big piece about that. So, there are hidden disabilities. Not all disabilities are visible. Don't assume that someone does not have a disability just because you don't see one. Just because you can't physically see that, it doesn't mean that they may not have a disability. People who are deaf or hard of hearing, they may communicate through sign language, lip reading, or regular speech. Speaking directly to the deaf person, not to their interpreter, especially if they read lips. They will need to see your lips. And I know that that was something that was so key for me in Partners in Policymaking. We had a few people that actually could read lips. So they always sat close to the front so they could watch the speaker speak. And sometimes I know it was difficult for them to understand me because I don't always speak very clear. And so it's important when you do speak very clear that you don't talk loudly, because this is going to mess up lip reading. Talk as you normally would, but be very clear. And including people who are deaf in this decision-making process is very important. They're just like us. We're all the same. We're all just very unique. So make sure to get their attention before you're speaking to them. I often wonder if some of the folks in my house have that issue, because when I'm speaking to them from another room, I may not have gotten their attention. And so I need to make sure that I have their attention. So even a person that is deaf or hard of hearing, we do want to make sure that we have their attention. And it does help if we have those discussions in a quiet, well-lit room, because background noise is often confusing and overly distracting, especially to those with hearing aids. I want to talk a little bit about epilepsy and seizure disorders. People with epilepsy have seizures, not epileptic fits. The important thing to know is you can't do anything to stop a seizure. So if a person falls, you want to make sure that their head is turned to one side and protect them and wait for the seizure to end. So ensure that they have privacy and respect when the seizure is over. And know that the person may be disoriented or embarrassed. And seizures, on a personal note, I have learned that seizures really have such a different look. I have children with disabilities, and now my husband has seizures. And he does not have the clotonic seizures where he falls down. So it looks so different. So be aware that it does look different, and ask the family members what kind of seizures, what does it look like. That's also very helpful for you to have an idea of how you can best support them. It's a very critical piece. So let's talk about some more of those hidden disabilities that we don't see. People with psychiatric disabilities or mental health conditions, the majority of them are not violent. It may affect their ability to think or feel, and it keeps pressure. We need to keep pressure with situations at a minimum. And people have varying personalities and cope so different, and they have different coping strategies, especially when it comes to our children. Their coping strategies may not have acquired coping strategies. So we need to help them learn how to cope. So if there's a crisis, stay calm. Ask them to take deep breaths and be supportive. Even as mom, when there's situations that go on, I need to stay calm and keep focused. And I'll take deep breaths in order to help me refocus my thoughts so that I can help with the situation, keeping calm. So let's talk about people with developmental disabilities. They may need more time to learn new concepts. They may have difficulty applying what they learn to real situations. And they may need simple terms to process better. They can make their own decisions. Give them time. This is where, when you give a direction or they're speaking, give someone time to get out their thought process and allow them to share what they're talking about. When we are giving instructions, we want to make instructions and signs available and pictures and single word phrases or short phrases to help them, get the concepts that perhaps you're wanting them to learn. And majority of people with developmental disabilities, and even people without disabilities, it's we feel more confident in a routine or a repetitive environment. It always is. I mean, I get up at the same time every day. I get up at 5 a.m. every day. The first thing I do is I fix my coffee. I have my coffee. If I wake up at 7 and I don't have my cup of coffee, I am out of sorts. So we are creatures of habit. Very important to realize that. So let's talk a little bit more about autism spectrum disorder. Wow. We now know so much more than we knew 20 years ago or even 30 years ago. But we're learning so much more about disabilities. And that's what's wonderful about having the opportunity to be training and teaching about disabilities. It's a passion for me because I know how difficult as a parent it is. So I'm wanting to share that information. So when we're looking at autism spectrum disability, it's very confusing as a parent because we have classic autism, we have Asperger's syndrome, we have high functioning autism. So what does that all mean to me as a parent? What are some of the common characteristics of someone with autism spectrum disorder? My one son has autism spectrum disorder. It looks so different than my girlfriend who has 2 children with autism spectrum disorder. So different. So let's talk about, but there are some things that are characteristics that are just absolutely common, and we can see them. So we can talk about social communication can sometimes be different. Social imagination. I'm going to tell you, if there's a situation where I have a problem in the house, and I'm going to give this as an example, plumbing situation in our house, under the sink, we were trying to fix something and add on the garbage disposal. Had some very difficult time with it. Couldn't quite figure it out. My son peeped his head in there. And, oh my gosh, I don't know, he was probably 6 or 7 years. Peeped his head in there and looked. And he was like, well, you know, if you use that pipe over there, it can. I was shocked because he really didn't communicate with us on a regular basis. And it was interesting to see how socially he was interacting with us. So it's very important to realize that those may look a little bit different. And other characteristics that we may include would be sensitivity to noise, smell, taste, or touch. And in this, I have a lot of experience with. The noise level has always been an issue for my son. Also the smell and the feel of certain clothing. The feel of his clothing was very difficult. But he also liked to touch everything. So depending on how old he was and where we were, it would be different. So there can be a sensitivity. Extreme with my child, extreme anxiousness if that routine or process is broken, those clear directions. And sometimes we needed to have it be very visual. So we had the directions written so that where the routine would look. And we would talk about if there was going to be a change in routine. That was very helpful. Also, they may have special interests, such as hobbies that they are obsessively interested in. And I can share this. It's always been kind of interesting. We lived in Tallahassee, and there was every time a yellow truck would come by, my son would sing a song. And the song was related to pest control that was out in Tallahassee that ran a yellow truck. And he can sing it to this day, and he's 19 years old. He can sing it to this day. And it just always amazed us with him. And the other thing was his interest was in money. He loved money. He was very, very obsessive with money. So, and I have a friend whose child loves stuffed animals, specifically bunnies. So it's very interesting that we've kind of talked a little bit about their strengths. Um, they have a variety of different strengths, people on the autism spectrum disorder. Um, Not everyone. Remember, everyone's very, very different. So one of those is accuracy. Math, accuracy, my son, awesome, phenomenal, absolutely. A good eye for detail. Mm, Honesty and reliability. An excellent memory for facts and figures. That's my son all the way. The ability to strive in a structured, well-organized work environment. Very critical. Not only the work environment, but the home environment works much better if it's very well structured. And I'm sorry, my home is not a structured place. It is a place of fun and relaxation after a day at work. So let's talk about some of the benefits of employing people with disabilities. There's economic incentives by the federal and state government provides economic incentives. They can be very dedicated and reliable employees. And my experience has been that is so much the case. Also, it's you get community recognition when you hire people with disabilities. It lets them know that you care. And the amazing thing, which I've always, it says that there's very low employee turnover. All the statistics that come in say that this is happening with our folks with disabilities when they're employed. They're very, very loyal, very low employee turnover. Don't know why that is, but it is absolutely there. Please always remember that people with disabilities know what they can and can't do, but don't assume or expect them to not be able to help themselves. Very important. Allow people with disabilities to make their own decisions as to what they can and can't participate in. The contrary, not allowing them, would be considered discrimination and a violation of the ADA. I'm going to repeat that because I think it's very, very important. We need, as a society, the law says we have to allow people with disabilities to make their own decisions as to what they can and cannot participate in. If we don't allow them that, that's considered discrimination and a violation of the ADA. So just because you may not be able to see someone's disability doesn't mean they don't have one. They have a hidden disability. It's very important to understand that. So we want to now kind of look at how do we bridge some gaps, and I want to specifically talk about bridging the gaps between minority and migrant families. Very important piece for us. We talked about that cultural diversity, right? We talked about that. All cultures are different and unique. It's where our roots are. It's our upbringing. It's our values. It's our needs. It's our concerns. And I can give you a really good example of how different things can be. I was born in France. My mother's French. We came here when I was 6 years old. When I was 10, well, before I get to that part, so very much proper bringing, everything has a place, very aware of our environment. And we had rituals that were very important when it came to eating and socializing, very important. When I was 10 years old, my father got stationed in Japan. And there, the culture is much different than the American culture or the French culture. And we went there and we were eating. And, you know, my mother would always correct us. If we made any sound as we're eating any food, we would get in so much trouble. That fork would reach across and boom, there it was. When we got to Japan and we sat down to eat, it was important, and it was to show respect of the person's food, the way they ate. It was important to slurp your food. So for 3 years while we lived in Japan, we would slurp our food. And I remember my Japanese girlfriend's grandmother could slurp an orange, and I didn't know that that was slurpable. But that was the cultural difference in the norms, and something so easy as table manners. What that looks like it can look so tremendously different. When we got back to the States, my brother and I were still slurping. So my mother straightened us out, and she said, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." We are now back in the United States. It's not polite to slurp. There is no more slurping at this table. And we learned. And so that was a beginning for us as children to learn how cultures are so diverse and unique and different. It doesn't make it wrong or rude. It's just different. It's our upbringing. It's our values. So you can see that with that conversation with my mom and the cultural difference with the food, it's really important that things can happen, right? We can have communication problems. So it's important to be open and honest and exchange information on both problems and solutions. It's easy for us to whine, but I always believe that if you're going to complain about something, let's find the solution. And we'll talk more about that when we're talking more about collaborative communication, even more so. But we do want to be looking at that. We want to continue to involve people beyond the initial contact. So you don't want to just meet someone and say, "Hey, hi, okay, that's it." So we need to be asking questions to make sure that the families understand us, because there's a big difference between that scenario I just gave you about my family and living in Japan for a while. It's not easy. It's we're looking at involvement. God, that sounds so easy to say. Let's get involved. That sounds easier than it is, because we have school policies, state statutes, procedures, state sunshine standards, chain of command, federal regulations. There's all kinds of stuff that's just so different. And so we need to be aware of those things. And outreach, what is outreach? The dictionary defines outreach as a systemic attempt to provide services beyond conventional limits to a particular segment of the community, to reach out, to extend. So it doesn't stop where, like the food situation I was talking about, it just doesn't stop right there. To reach out, we need to change some of the things that we're doing and look at that piece. We want to reach out. So reach out looks totally different. Totally different, and I'm so sorry about that. We want to reach out and reach out into the community, to reach out and extend. Very critical piece. So why is it so hard? Outreach. Why is it so hard? We have closed communities, lack of voluntary participation, lack of personal communication. We're agreeable, but we're not engaged. Why is that? So we do have issues and factors. We have trust issues, authority. We have family, language, welcoming, and respect. So trust is very difficult. We have past experiences with people, and we've had empty promises, and we've had, are you a governmental employee? Are you a service provider? So decisions have been made, outcomes are unknown. We have privacy issues. So this can be very hard. So how can we change some of those? How can we change some of those issues? Well, one of the first things we can do is follow through. I found that very critical in my life. No matter what I do, I will follow through. If I say I'm going to follow through, I will follow through. I'm very honest. Being honest is very important. It's a key piece. Watch that body language. We're going to talk more about, I keep saying we're going to talk more about that in collaborative communication when we're talking about collaborative, because that's body language is like 60% of what we convey. So emphasize your intentions. Your intentions are very important. And be courteous. Be very courteous. And invite a trusted third party. Now, when it comes to outreach, this is truly important. I'm going to share a story of a good friend of mine. We were working together and wanting to give classes in a community that trust had been broken, that the government had let them down. And in many ways, they're isolated by circumstance. And we wanted to do this project together and come in and talk to this group. And the group really didn't want me there. They didn't want me there at first. And my friend said, look, she's good people. She's coming in and you can trust her. That's where the involvement comes. They didn't want me, right? They did not want me. I had to become involved. I had to take a chance. I had to be honest. I needed to watch my body language. And I needed to look for their intention. And I most definitely needed to be curious. And to let you know, it was successful. I am now an accepted part of the community, totally different than my own upbringing. And I learned that through differences, we can work together and make a change for all of our communities. When we look at authority, when we're looking at this, is that history says that sometimes we question authority or any level of authority, or if someone has a higher level of education and we don't see them as a useful contribution, or if they have lack of self-confidence, or we may have lack of self-confidence in ourselves. So how do we get around some of those issues? We want to ask questions. We want to give details and choices and options. Don't lecture. I'm not much of a lecturer. I sometimes have a hard time when we're doing webinars. It's easier for me to have a conversation with the group and talk about things and get that interaction going because I can see that. And so sometimes that can be difficult. So, assuring the family members that their roles are important and making sure for the families, how do we stay involved? Raise our hand, be prepared, have questions prepared ahead of time. Look for the intention of the people, and always remember that as a parent, we really do know what's best. We are the expert of our child. I always say we are the CEO of our family. That kind of brings us to the family portion. Family structure, entire family structures look so different. Who's the head of the family? Who do we invite? What is the polite way to do this? This sometimes can be very difficult to figure out. So we want to look at some of those strategies. We want to consider what those needs are of that family. And how do we invite the extended families? And then let's not be pressing for decisions. and offer time for private discussion, and then leave the room. I like that, leave the room, giving the family an opportunity to figure out what they want to do, because they're a family unit and we want to allow that to stay there and respect their cultural differences and put it together. So we want to bridge those gaps. And with the involvement, give input. Don't assume. We need to be asking those questions. We'll discuss and get it back to you. And may we have a moment to discuss this. So these are all strategies that we can use with families. Talked a lot about language differences, family preferences, dialects. State of Florida, we have 300 different languages being spoken in our school systems. That's a lot. How do we do this? Culturally different than English, most definitely, right? In heritage and culture and respect, all of those. How do we outreach to folks? We can offer interpreters, avoid using slangs. Oh my goodness. Slangs are very hard to interpret. And when I think about in the school system or on the medical side of this, we have so many acronyms. Avoid using those. And if you have to use them because it's part of what we do, then go ahead and explain the acronym. Explain that. And avoid asking questions. Do you understand? Avoid asking that question to the interpreters. So it's very important because you're asking the family, not the interpreters. And I want you to think about this. Avoid using the children. Okay? The reason is that the children may know the language and they may be able to interpret, but they're children. And usually when we're wanting to reach out, it's not about what games we want to play, right? Or are we having pizza or spaghetti? They're usually adult conversations. So we do want to avoid using the children. And we want to speak clearly and simply. I tend to talk too fast sometimes. Sometimes it's nervousness. Sometimes it's this cup of coffee that gets me in trouble. It just never stops. So we want to make sure that we are speaking clearly so that we can be understood. Okay, so we talk about involvement. Ask for, if they have any questions, ask them to take notes. And do you have questions, and do they have questions in their native language? So that's where we can use that interpreter. And it's okay, to, ask the questions, explaining that difficulty that you're having in relaying your intention of what you're wanting to do. Sometimes that can be a little bit more difficult than that. Welcoming is so important. It's so important. And I know that sometimes when I'm going into a new area that I haven't been, or I'm not sure, that I try really hard, because we're very uncertain of invitation or welcome, and we don't know who has the authority or what past experiences have people experienced, and are we at risk for rejection? What does that look like? What does that look like? So some really good tips and strategies would be including diverse graphics and materials, avoiding negative comments. Always be positive, optimistic, welcoming, respectful. A lot of times one of the biggest barriers would be childcare. So providing childcare can be very helpful. And I've always said that providing food just seems to draw people more together. I don't care what culture, where we are. It's a big piece of reaching out to folks. Um, how do we stay involved? Um, if we're needing to pull someone aside to explain a perception, be very open, be very respectful. Um, we can ask about childcare. As a parent, we can ask about childcare. We can even suggest things such as potluck because I know our budget doesn't allow that. So how do we get around some things sometimes so that everybody can participate and feel respected? And then, especially with potluck, then we get to share and learn about new foods too. Um, it's all families should feel that their own culture is respected and celebrated. So if you're really unsure or unfamiliar with the family's culture, ask questions. Ask questions about their cultures. Ask about what is respectful, what is not respectful. Um, we need to have mutual understanding. Now, it's okay not to agree, you know, but we still need to be respectful. It is acceptable to ask questions. There are no wrong questions. And the one thing we do not want to do is assume. And reach out as a human being. Reach out as a person. Remember that partnership will always benefit our family members, our children. Partnerships are very important. We want to bridge that out, the gap. We want the best outcomes. They're truly achieved when families are involved, communication is collaborative, and parties actively participate. They're actively working together on things. It's an important piece of what we're doing and how it looks. I also want to talk about today, we want to talk about caring for the caregiver. No matter the cultural differences, we have caregivers and their roles look so different. So what's that definition? What is a caregiver, right? What is a caregiver? That's a family member, a friend, or a neighbor who takes care of a frail or disabled person. Raising a child is incredibly satisfying and a really important responsibility. However, parents of special needs children know that. Caring for a child with a disability requires assistance for a disability. It brings its own challenges. Every disability brings its own challenges. It looks so different. And we have, and I alluded to that at the beginning of the workshops when we were talking, as I alluded to that sandwich generation. It's a generation of people typically in their 30s or 40s responsible for bringing up their own children and the care of their aging parents. But in these times and with some of the crises that we have on, we also have grandparents who are raising their grandchildren due to the opiate epidemic, which is very sad. And so now you have someone who may be taking care of their own children or their grandchildren and their aging parents, or as in my situation, a spouse. So it can be very difficult. And that's why in this workshop, I really wanted to talk about the importance of caregiver responsibilities and how to take care of yourself. So as parents, we think that we get this juggling act, right? When we're raising a family, we're coordinating. We're thinking, okay, I'm going to be a parent. We're going to juggle soccer games and ballet and grocery shopping. But we have a child with a disability or special needs. It looks so different. We might be helping care for the elderly, for our elderly parents or spouse. And here we go. We have a totally different juggling act. And we still may have some of the other juggling going on, job, work. So We may have things such as assisting with personal care. We may have bathing, grooming, dressing, toileting, exercise, basic food preparation, preparing meals and shopping, housekeeping, laundry, and other errands. And I don't care if you're a mom or a dad. And can be very overwhelming. Helping with home organization, packing or cleaning for a trip, or general house care or cleaning. And we all know in this state, when it came time for the hurricanes, the majority of us evacuated. What did that look like for us? It looks so different, because not only did we have to prepare our homes and prepare, check in with work and get enough supplies in case we come back and there's no electricity. If we evacuated, where are we going if we evacuate? Who can help with what? Those responsibilities are huge. Waiting for doctors and insurance companies to return your phone calls. The finances are very difficult. Mobility and transportation. Working with Family Star, I received a lot of calls directed toward transportation. We have children that are going to activities, and then we have children that have disabilities and special needs that have transportation, and they have to have special transportation to other areas. How do we do this? What does it look like? The stress level that it comes on. We're having these supervision and emotional supports that we're needing. We're constantly providing supervision, and we're trying to create this stable companionship for all matters for our children. So it can be very difficult and very overwhelming. One of the most important pieces of this is that we know that we're not alone. Okay, we're like warriors, caregiving warriors. Okay, we put on this strength of armor and go forward. And when we need help, we need to ask for help. We have this armor that we wear, and I do this all the time. I have children with special health care needs. My children need a lot of assistance from me in so many different ways. And I wear this armor to protect me, and so that I'm ready to go out and carry my little toolkit of information that really put things together for me. And so I've learned that appreciating so many of the small things, it used to be getting to graduation. What did that look like? You look at things so differently and frequently, and it's important that we do that. We look at that, and we revel around their successes. But it really has deeper meaning, because we care so much, and you can see my eyes become very watery sometimes, and a lot of times with presentations that I give, I do, because it means so much. So, it's such a deeper meaning of emotions. Absolutely. And, it's important that we realize that we're not alone, even though there have been times I feel so isolated or others feel so isolated. The CDC says that about 1 in 6 children ages 3 to 17 have one or more developmental disabilities. So we're not alone. We're just not alone. And finding balance is a key. I'm going to give you an analogy of, and this one has stuck with me for many, 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 many years. For those of you that have flown in an airplane, we hear when we get into the airplane, we sit down and we get buckled, and just before takeout, they tell us all about the things we need to know for safety, right? Have to have our seatbelt on, the flotation devices below our seat. I always kind of feel for that. It's so funny because I've got into such a habit that I'm reaching for my toolkit, or where are all my things just in case. Then they say something very important. And this is where it leads to finding that balance. They talk about that airbag. They say when the airbag comes down, take the mask and slide it over onto yourself. before you go to help someone else. Now, this is critical. The reason we're doing that is that there's a lack of oxygen in the cabin. So we had to put the mask on ourselves in order to breathe, to be able to help someone else. If you've ever been involved in a crisis situation, whether it's a child with a disability or just a crisis, someone may be out of control and needing help, right? How do we help that person? But even ourselves, if we are panicking and not having control or planned, how do we help them? So it's crucial that we find that balance, that we have that oxygen available. And that's why the lovely of some of the things that we do here with Family Star and Family Network on Disabilities is helping folks put their toolkits together, finding that balance. We're going to look at identifying some of those stressors and the effects that it has on our caregivers. And we're going to talk about the causes and the tolls that, if we're not careful, what it could take. It is very, very crucial. So my question is that, do you have balance? Do you have balance? And I want you to think about the wheels on a car for an analogy, okay? Okay, so we're going about town, and then all at once we feel something bumpy, right? Something sort of out around. It's a bumpy ride. But this bumpy ride can affect not only our well-being, but everyone around us. So our friends, our family, our classmates, those in the service industry can all be affected if we don't have that sense of a full, healthy wheel. Because if you think about it, right, it could make it difficult to steer. It could make it that bumpy ride. It could cause a wreck. And it could cause us to not reach our destination. Now, sometimes we can almost take that literally with that car, but that can happen with our life if we don't have that balance as well. We have so many caregiver stressors, so many. We have time deficits. I think about all the times that I've wanted to be on time for things and I've had to rearrange things because my children were not prepared. That emotional strain that it causes on myself and my family. Sometimes it can cause health problems. Headaches are my favorite ones. My goodness, if I think about something too much. So it causes these health problems, but it can cause severe health problems. And definitely financial burdens. I sometimes feel like financial burdens should almost be on the top, because having loved ones with healthcare issues can be such a strain on our budget and trying to figure out how to make that work. When we look at time, we have such high expectations of ourselves, right? Of course, I'm going to be the best parent, the best wife, the best employee, or I am going to have the best company. My people are going to do things. These often become some of our biggest stressors, our expectations of ourselves. So when we're talking about our children, we feel as though our child's success or failure depends exclusively on us. And if we're running a corporation or an office, that's there. So, and it takes time. And the time sometimes feels like the clock's just running out. So let's talk about our children. How do we get them to where they need to be developmentally or medically? We worry about the future. What does our future hold? How are they going to be independent and productive individual? What manner, how am I raising my child? How is this going to affect his outcome or their outcome? What about the placement in life? How is this all going to look? It's such an emotional strain, internal stressors. We have self-blame. Parents may feel guilty. There's such a guilt associated with that disability or even a chronic illness, especially when it's caused by a genetic predisposition or when it is present at birth. Often we wonder, to what degree are we to blame for this illness? And sometimes it just feels like it's all on our shoulders, whether our child, this failure, when behavioral problems are present, that parents don't approve of, and they're not able to discipline without feeling even more guilt. Very, very difficult. So it causes so much pain and confusion, especially if you're not able to have that loving relationship with your child. Some illnesses and disabilities are not conducive to warm and closeness. And so as a parent, we all want that kind of relationship with our child. So depending on what the condition of the child has, it may be necessary for us as parents to adjust our expectations of how that relationship needs to be framed. Oftentimes there's perception. What other people think, of that we're to blame for this problem. There's really another expression of self-blame. Some parents, either consciously or subconsciously, come to the belief that other people hold them responsible for what's going on with their child's illness. This is very rare, but it does happen, and parents still harbor some of those feelings. Siblings. I had raised one child on his own, and then I had two more children later who were raised in the same household. So there was often resentment that I was spending more time with one child than the other child. So they may feel that, and their feelings are real. This is important. And certain types of disabilities will have difficult behaviors. And then it's not what we want to see in our child. So how do we effectively discipline or correct the behavior, and so that it doesn't become chronic in nature? Financial burden is huge for us. Medical bills can quickly become too much to handle. Additional care and services, medications, doctor's visits, hospitalizations. And if we're already overburdened household budget, it can be very difficult. Wow. And sometimes parent conflict. I don't know about you, but my husband and I have not always been on the same page when it comes to our children. Why is that? It's very difficult. We're raised differently. We have different thoughts on how to handle. We don't understand the disability. So it can be a big stressor. Receiving services at one point for us was a huge issue. Trying to get the support and services that were appropriate for our child. Who's best suited to help our child? And it's really important that we need to understand our own abilities and limitations so that we can get the supports that we need for not only our children, but for ourselves. School placement's big. Where does my child have the best chance, of becoming educated and independent? So what services are often available in the schools? We need to look at that for that development and growth. Finding a school is a big stressor. Oh, and educating others. The grocery store, right? I know somebody out there is shaking their head going, yeah, I can relate to that one. So educating others and even our family members sometimes can be very difficult. These put huge stressors on us constantly. And health problems can be things such as higher blood pressure, insulin levels, increased cardiovascular disease, and compromised immune systems. All things that can cause problems for us. Not only that, but mental health problems, mostly predominantly depression when we have children with disabilities. I think that anxiety rates in there. These are things that constantly worry us. Uh, Financial burdens and retirement insecurity. What does retirement look like for us with our children with disabilities? What supports can we give them? It's just very, very, very stressful. The financial burden of this is how do we do this? So I know that in some of this, we can write a list that we can use. Can you think of others that that can affect you? These stressors, having less and less energy, is a big one. For me, it's a huge one sometimes. Um, you're so preoccupied with being a caregiver, but you have very little, satisfaction from that. Sleeping doesn't relieve any of your feelings of exhaustion or anxieties. You have less and less social contact sometimes. Uh, you may have less and less desire for social contact. Um, it just, these burdens can continue to to grow and grow, and if you ignore them, they kind of fester. So the damage untreated can lead to burnout. The inability to function in everyday life. It can also escalate into life-threatening situations for a person with a disability because the caregiver, the possible, and even other family members. So caregivers really need loving support from friends and family. Unfortunately, the behaviors associated with burnout tend to push away who? Our friends and our family when they're actually needed the most. Fortunately, it is really possible to recover from burnout and prevent it from happening. We need to look at the signs of what it is that's going on. We need to look at these signs and be aware of them. We need to wear the physical signs. Some of the physical signs are headaches, feeling of fatigue or low energy, muscle aches and pains, chest pains, sleep difficulty, frequent colds or infections, drop in sex life, upset stomach, diarrhea, constipation, teeth grinding. And I'm sure that you can write down even more than that on your list. So knowing that this is just so much, we need to remember that we can't pour from an empty cup. Okay? We need to refill that cup. We need to take care of ourselves. I always laugh because to me, chocolate is it really, dark chocolate especially, um, it really changes our body's response to stress. And so I always laugh because it's like a lot of times you say, okay, I'm eating chocolate, give me chocolate. Um, there are some things that we can do to get support for ourselves as a caregiver. And I want to talk about the benefits of getting support. And that is and it's really important to know that it's research based. They've identified these benefits for the caring for the caregiver. We can reduces taking care of ourselves, reduces caregiver stress and depression. It increases knowledge and skill sets big time. It increases coping and resiliency. I always wear my Superwoman jammies. So improves continual care and outcome for older adults as well. And it helps avert, crisis situations and calls to care managers. We can find very good reasons for getting the support. But it's also important to know where we are, where we're at, and how to find directions where to go. So for parents and children with special needs, it's really, really, really important to understand what happens with grief, because grief, it's actually very predictable. And So the outcomes of grief is that sense of loss that's going on, and it's very common for parents or to have various feelings of grief at any point throughout your child's development. And this is why we refer to them as cycles of grief. Some of the first pieces on that is we have understanding that is that we have at first when we give the example of our child's diagnosis, we have this shock and denial. It was such a shock to think that our child was on the autism spectrum. That was such a shock. No, there's no way that this is what this is. It has to be something else. There's the avoidance, there's the confusion. And of course, it's like, what the heck do we do next, right? We have this total fear. And then a lot of times we have numbness that comes with it, within that piece. And blame. Did the meds do it? Did the doctors do this? How could this happen? This happened somewhere else. This didn't happen like this. And then we go into the next piece of this, which is the anger, the frustration, the anger, the anxiety, the irritation, the embarrassment, the shame. We're so angry. Why? Why did this happen? How could this happen? I'm so mad. You're anxious, embarrassed. Sometimes the embarrassment and shame, and it's hard. And then what happens next is this leads into depression and detachment. Okay, overload, total overload, totally overwhelmed. And I know for myself, I can talk about myself because I can see myself going through these cycles of grief. The blahs, okay, whatever. Lack of energy. I don't have energy to do anything. And that helplessness. Then we have the next stage is kind of like this dialogue and bargaining, right? So we're starting on this road of getting a little better, because that detachment, the depression and the detachment to me is like the total low, right? The total low. So we get into dialogue and bargaining. We're going to reach out to others. We're wanting to share our story. Hey, this is what happened, and this is how we got the diagnosis, and I just don't get it. And what does this mean for me? So you're bargaining, right? You're totally bargaining. And then with that was that advocacy piece, because you're reaching out and you're reaching into like an acceptance piece, where you're actually able to start returning to a meaningful life. And in that acceptance, you're going, okay, so we have autism spectrum disorder. So we have ADHD. So we have low bone density. So, we have brittle bone disease. What does this mean? What does this look like? Looking at the different options. Where are my options? How do I put something in place, a plan, right? So we can get back to what we're doing. But then something happens and new bones are broke in a new place. Holy cow, here we go again. We're back into shock and denial. That's okay. Then we're back into the anger piece, and then we may become depressed. But the whole point of this cycles of grief is that the more we use the acceptance piece and put tools in our toolbox and learn how to put our shield in front of us so that we can protect ourselves, the less time we spend in anger and shock and denial and depressive and detachment. And oftentimes with my friends, I say, where are you? Where are you? Where are you in this stage? And even to look around a room and talk with folks and say, where are you? Sometimes understanding that cycles of grief remind me that there is help, that I can return to that meaningful life. And what will my meaningful life look like? So I'm okay. I'm doing well. I can do this. It's important for my social, emotional, my intelligence, my sports, everything. When we look at social wellness, We look at our relationships, our community interactions, um, those dimensions that when we consider how we relate to others, how do we relate to others? How do we connect? How do we communicate to get along with the people that we're surrounded by? Looking at spiritual wellness, meanings, values. So this dimension actually it establishes peace and harmony in our lives. It's that sense of purpose, the meaningful purpose, and emotional wellness. When we're emotional wellness, it's our feelings, right? Our emotions, our reactions, our cognition, Um, are we in touch with our feelings and emotions? Do we know our cycles of grief? Or we know when we're having a sorrowful time? How do we kick back out of it? We having joy, love? This is going to help us cope with those emotional challenges that come on in our lives. And so important, occupational wellness. Um, our skills, our finances, our being satisfied in our job and knowing that it has meaning. And for me, knowing that I'm not alone is really key. And sharing my story and sharing information from others who have a lot more knowledge. It means so much to find that meaningfulness. It brings that balance. But I also know when it's time to have that balance for leisure time and work. Because sometimes we have to make tough choices in our lives. But we need to have that balance between work and home life as well. Um, and intellectual wellness is that critical thinking, creative, and curiosity. Um, we have to be, and for me, it's a lifelong learner. We don't, so that adage about you can teach a dog new tricks, it's very true. We can teach an old dog new tricks. We can continue learning and growing. We just have to be very open to our experiences in order to continue growing. Um, and we'll talk more about that physical wellness as well, because we need healthy habits for our body, our nutrition. For me, walking the dog's really critical, and I try really hard to eat, balanced meals, a little bit of everything to help out with that piece. We have to have these pieces out to be able to figure out where we're at, um, to continue on. Um, And we need to, when we're doing this, some really good points to point out here is that we need to be able to problem solve. So I do want to share a little bit about problem solving. Um, and we have a 5-step method, I think, that works really well. It works really well for me um, because sometimes I feel like we have this marathon going, right? Because there's always a problem, always a problem. But if I write things down and I tackle what's important, then it helps me out. So what I'm doing is that we take that first step and we're identifying the problem, right? So I have a problem, and then I'm going to make a plan. My second part is going to be I'm going to make a plan. And I'm going to think about 2 or 3 choices. I don't want to just say, okay, here's my problem, and I say, this is, I'm just going to do this, like, okay, here's my problem. I want to be able to, we have 2 activities going, and the activities are both at the same time, and we want to go to both. So this is a problem. I've identified my problem, right? So now I'm going to give myself a couple of choices on this. You want to think of 2 or 3 choices. So I might sit there, write down my problem, right? I have 2 activities I want to go to. And then I'm going to identify a plan, right? So identify the plan is the plan would have several parts. I'm going to think what'll happen if, right? I'm going to write it down. Okay, so if I go to plan A, or the 2 activities, can they be done on different days would be a question. Can I do them at 2 different times? Are these activities available? Who benefits? What'll happen next? And then list out, kind of identify. So identify that plan in number two, and figure out what are my options here. So in number three, I'm looking at, okay, identify the plan, right? So what's going to happen if I go to the first activity? Because that's part of my plan. I'm going to make a plan to attend the first activity, what that looks like, what the second activity looks like. So what happens if I do activity one or activity two? So you're looking at working the strategy, right? Working that strategy. So I've decided that I'm going to go to activity one. We're going to do number one. And then we may want to then look at it. So we're going to do that. And then after we have the activities, we may want to measure, was this successful? Which do I really want to do? So we kind of measure what's happened during that time and identify that so that we can feel powerful about that. And it's kind of like, that's going to also help drive like goal setting, right? So I want to set some goals from that problem solving because I can see that these happen daily. And if you look at your daily routine, sometimes that can be very helpful. So some of the best ways for goal setting is educating ourselves about what is going on and what we can do, and communicating our feelings and our needs. We can make a list of things we want to do, and one of the important pieces that we have as a caregiver is communicating our needs and feelings. All right. So, do you know where to go to get help? Right? Do we know? You can make a list of people that you can ask for help or ask for favors, and you can be really creative. I've had people bring over lunch and play with my older son while I was able to take a nap. So this way somebody was playing with my child and I could rest, or I could get involved, with my Sudoku with peace and quiet. So, and then I've also key things to do is asking anyone if they've had somebody that helps them out. Friends are a very good resource for that, and support groups are a very good resource for that. I've had friends come over and help me out and stay with me so that I could get things done. And the other thing is you can actually call your insurance company. Your insurance company sometimes will be able to share resources with you and get information about counselors. But we really need to, as a caregiver, we need to be honest about what we need, right? Because sometimes we've got that armor on and we feel like we're invincible. So we need to look at how do we communicate that. We need to be honest about what our needs are. So how do we do you know what your needs are? Do I know what my needs are? We can create a list of these needs, okay? How many of you have heard someone tell you, let me know if there's anything I can do for you, right? I know you've heard this. And then, do you respond to that? How do you do that? I know I a lot of times have not. And so people really do want to help, but they don't know how. They don't know how because they don't know what your needs are. So if you have a list of your needs, then you might be able to look at that and pick someone that can help you with some of those needs. Grandparents and siblings can help do things. Now, don't make it their burden, but occasionally asking for that help. And some of the best resources that I have found have been in other caregivers. So meeting friends at support groups and play groups. Over the years, I have found other families that are in the same kind of boat, and we kind of trade off sometimes. Can you come over? Let's have a play date, and during that play date, I'm able to get something else done, or they're able to get something else done. And sometimes it's not both of us, we're just together, so we get that information. So you need to make, like I statements and let them know that you're needing those help. I need help with, I would like to be able to do this. Um, Another tip that's really, really, really important um, is to not take meltdowns personally. Whether you have a child with Down syndrome, Asperger's syndrome, a child on the spectrum, um, you know what that is. You know what that is. Um, Taking care of children with meltdowns. Even my other children have had meltdowns, so it's very difficult, and you can't take it. It looks different. Know the difference between that meltdown and a temper tantrum, um, and know how to help your child by holding them down during a meltdown so that they're safe. I know that my son had regular meltdowns, and sometimes it was emotionally draining because I knew that he wasn't wanting to do what he was doing, but he felt this total loss of self control. And it truly took a lot out on me. So I felt like it was an assault on my person, like me, and I'm trying to keep him safe. And it's tough, but and it's keeping your own cool and your composure, um, and knowing that it wasn't personal was very, very important for me. Um, and then learning how to cope with and realizing that the meltdown's going to come to an end. Um, and yeah, definitely something that's embarrassing when it's in public. Um, but I've learned to kind of ignore those odd looks or the comments of others. And the reality is that it's going to end soon. I have walked away watching silently as my children together have had a meltdown, and watched in a distance until they realized that I wasn't paying attention to them. But there were other folks, and they came over to me. I have watched one child have a meltdown in the store and sit in the middle of the floor. And I walked away and stood there and watched right at the end cap and watched. And people came up and asked if they could help. And it was like, no, he'll be fine. Just give him a little bit of time. So I had to learn to ask for help, because it does take a village in order sometimes um, to raise a child, especially a child with disabilities. And we need to let friends and family members know that they can help in little ways. It may be simple things, but trying to crack some of that pressure by using that list that we've created. Joining in a community has been very important to me, because there have been times when I felt so isolated. I don't know if it's isolated or exhaustion that's worse, but joining a caregiver support group can be really, really, really an invaluable resource for those like-minded parents. So sometimes you have to go to several to find the right one that fits for you. Because seeking help doesn't always mean asking someone to do something. It's often that you just need to maintain contact with other friends and families and other people. And it can be hard. However, when your kids really, they need you close by. So ask for a friend to come over, to help you out, to laugh, to talk, to share a cup of coffee. These burdens, they shouldn't just be on you. It can help you have a lot on your plate. Most people want to help, and they'll love to give you a helping hand. It'll make them feel stronger and better, and so will you. It'll give you that support. Financial support is a whole other story, very, very difficult, because chronic illnesses and disabilities tend to pull families apart for emotional reasons. It's so draining on financial budgets and resources. The additional medications and services and counseling. Um, Many of those, they progressively grow over the lifetime of the disability. And when researching, it's like you can become so overwhelmed. So, however, there are where we live, there are government programs and private programs that are available to help families. Sometimes they can be so very difficult to find, but there are also other, you know, disabled children's charities and even volunteer caregiver programs. And sometimes physicians and counselors in the community can help and suggest those websites for you that are also available. When it comes to siblings, it's very important to nurture those relationships. I know that when my children, when they were younger, they were very, very close. And then as things became more difficult for my son, their relationship kind of drifted apart. And then when they went into their teen years, they discovered that one, my daughter was very, very good with language arts and reading and writing, and he was very good with math. And we had to find those moments. I had to find those moments and say, you know, your brother's really awesome with this. He can help you. And then they sat down together and worked through this. It gave my son that self of power that he needed to hear. And she felt so pleased that she was able to get this work done. So they both walked away together, learning from each other. And then they continued this relationship and they continue it. Another critical piece is that sometimes each child needs some attention. It's quality time. So we had to, in our home, we had to make it a ritual where we actually spent quality. And it's not just, it's quality, it's not quantity that makes a difference. So even though sometimes it was very simple things, such as taking a ride in the car and listening to music that my daughter really enjoyed, all those long rides. All very, very important because we want to empower our family, and that this is what our normal is, you know. And then problem solve as a team when we're looking at things. We want to problem solve as a team. And what's really neat is that when we're saying something really good about our children and we're bragging about them, because their accomplishments may look different than others, but they're accomplishments, and they need to hear us brag about those accomplishments just as well. Now, it's very, very important. Accomplishments such as waiting in the doctor's office for 2 hours patiently and quietly may seem like a typical expectation, but for our family, that was so very difficult and it caused so many behaviors. And so as time grew and we learned those skills, definitely letting them know. And make sure that we're not isolating ourselves just because of behaviors. Don't seclude yourself from others. Reach out to others. Make those connections of folks that can accept you. And one of the best parts of social support sometimes comes from other parents and their kids. But we need respite. You know, we need respite care. It's something that's very difficult to find. Community health agencies sometimes have forms of respite care depending on our child's disability, but respite care can come from friends as well. We can look at, there are agencies that will provide respite care for us to give us a break or even to give us a break to go out on a date. For many years, my husband and I did not go out on dates because it was just not possible, feasible. And then our dates became the grocery store, which was a pleasure to be able to grocery shop together and hold hands in the grocery store. You need to look at, in order, you know, to find those few moments for respite, look at those creative outlets and expressions. It may be photography, it may be scrapbooking, it may be listening to music or writing, sewing or cooking. Sometimes mine has been cooking, sometimes it's been sewing. And you know that I'm using those creative outlets, especially when I reach out and there is a lot of cookies in my freezer, an overabundance of cookies. So it is kind of funny how that works. But we need to find something, and it may be just jotting something down, and setting really that me time, and then just that time to have for yourself. One of those things that was really difficult at the beginning was saying no. Saying no, no is a complete sentence. Um, I'm like the kind of person that's really full of ideas, but I have to limit myself, because if I stretch too thin, right, stretch myself out, I'm no longer able to really take care of my kids in the most appropriate way that I can. So I try really hard to give myself a few minutes. I try exercise, and my exercise consists of walking the dog. Very, very helpful piece. It's good for my dog. It's good for me, and it gives me a moment out. And trying that date night, like I said, we had to get very creative with date night. Um, Finding a place to worship sometimes can be very difficult. Many now communities, when it comes to a place of worship, have found ways of allowing families that have children with disabilities to participate. Even I love now that you can go online to Facebook, because so many places of worship are out there on Facebook, and they project their worship services on Facebook. So I can attend even if I'm not able to get out, whether it's that I'm sick and not feeling well, but I need that rejuvenation. It can be very, very helpful, like reaching out to support groups and related agencies. Are very important. Dad's needs are so different than ours as women. And I say this because I know this because I have a dad in my house, and he thinks of things and does things so differently than I do, that it's really important that dads are supported and they get to attend things in the community with their kids. And it looks so different, but I know that the dad in my house loves participating. So if you're interested in starting a parent support group or something for families, we have workshops that we can actually provide for you and help you with that. And I have done this locally on the Treasure Coast in Florida, and worked with a support group, and they continue to grow, which is just a wonderful feeling. And we can all help. And remember, my favorite part is remembering that dark chocolate really, really changes our response to stress. We're going to talk about, we're going to go into, with that stressful piece, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee here. And we're going to talk about communication. All through the other 5 workshops, we talked about communication and how important it is, and how it looks so different depending on culture, using diversity, whether you're in a front office and taking care of ourselves. It's an important piece. 10% of communication is using the spoken words. 30% is in that tone that we use. And I have a very loud voice, so sometimes it's very difficult for me. And 60% is in that body language. So according to Stephen Covey, it's not about how you say it. It's not just about what you say, but it's about how you say it. So, but even with those 2 parts of communication, it only adds up to 40%. So it's very important to know that the biggest part is body language. It's 60%, 60%. So much of what people perceive as what you're saying is due to your body language. So the foundation to all good communication can be summed up in one quote by Stephen Covey. It is, first seek to understand, then be understood. So you're wondering who's Dr. Stephen Covey, right? He's the author of several books, including the bestseller, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a good reading book that really talks about communication and very helpful source of information. So, you know, every action, even when we're silent, it's a communication. So, if I were to put my hands on my hips, you know, that's communicating to you, right? It's really saying something. Or if I'm like, talking and I'm rolling my eyes, um, you really, I'm communicating with you. It's talking to you, isn't it? It's really, really, really talking to you. Or if I'm just totally laid back, I'm really talking to you. You really feel that. I'm communicating with you, 60%. But if I'm trying to engage and being forward, it's also very, you see that that's engaging. So for effective communication, we really need to listen twice as much as we talk. And it's funny because we're taught all our lives that communication is 50-50, right? First you talk, then I talk, then you talk, and then it's my turn. While you're talking, I'm thinking about what to say next. And while I'm talking, you're thinking about what to say next. Oh, thinking, not listening. So communication isn't just about talking, but it's really paying attention to what that other person is saying. Kind of focusing on that conversation. It's called active listening. It's called active listening. So, what are the elements of active listening? We need to be attentive, non-judgmental. We need to paraphrase, but let's not overdo it. And be aware of that body language. One way you might want to make sure that the person really means that what the person means is to understand what that person is saying and what they mean is to repeat back to them in your own words or paraphrase. Just be careful not to overdo it because after a while, you can say saying things like, what I hear you saying is, that can be really annoying, right? So we need to be aware that not just our body language, but also our own, not only their body language, but ours. So pay attention to your posture and facial expressions. Turn toward the other person and make eye contact. Make that eye contact with them. Make the eye contact. But realize that in some cultures, eye contact is considered rude. So you can look to see if the other person is making that eye contact. Learning what their style is very, very, very helpful. So then we have the opposite of what active listening. It's called passive listening. So that passive listening is kind of like it's like what are you saying? Oh man, my inner voice just drowned you out for a second. I just wasn't there. What is that, right? And I'm sure you've had where you've sat and you were talking to someone and they're not paying attention to you. They might be reading the newspaper or nowadays it's not the newspapers. They're looking at their iPad and you're talking to them and they're like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They're looking like they're just, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then you're like, oh my gosh, stop. You can stop saying that. I stopped talking about an hour ago. I mean, we've always had those feelings. It's like you're looking at them and you're like going, really? Sometimes I just don't think you listen to a word I say. We get this feeling, like we're on an island. There's two people and I'm sorry. Were you talking to me? It's just, what's collaborative communication? What is it really? It's values and respects. It's respecting and valuing opinions, perspective, uh, the rights of both parties. It's kind of like, just like saying things like two heads are better than one. Multiple perspectives help in that solving problem and brainstorming. We have rights for both parties. Goes back to respect and general courtesy. It's not just legal rights, but the right to speak without interruption, the right to disagree, the right to ask questions. We all have those rights. What collaborative communication does, it encourages both parties, to express honest and open feelings. Uh, it promotes that mutual respect. It allows both that discussion and disagreement. And it allows for us to respect our cultural differences, allows us to remain focused on the topic at hand. We're not, when people are not giving open and honest input, others are left to draw on their own conclusions. And that can be far from the truth. And it can result in really unnecessary conflict. Mutual respect, really occurs when people at the table acknowledge that each and every person has critical information to share. So when individuals feel respected and valued, discussion and even with disagreement become possible without unresolved conflict. So when parents and educators communicate effectively, they can develop a partnership that is focused what's best for their child. Partnerships are very important. Partnerships are a relationship between individuals or groups that is characterized by mutual cooperation and responsibility as an achievement of a specific goal. So, as parents and educators, our goal really is the same, right? It's to help the children have successful outcome. The best outcome occurs when parents and educators can truly be partners in achieving the goal. It's the same thing as a parent with when we are in the doctor's office. Our goal is common. Our doctor's goal, our goals, our healthcare professionals, it is to help the children have successful outcomes. Again, the best outcome occurs when parents and the healthcare professionals truly become partners to achieve that goal. We know that sometimes there are barriers to communication. We have to start somewhere, right? We have to start somewhere. So drink a coffee. Coffee's good for you. We have barriers, right? We have negative history. Negative histories. We can have our own experiences, or things that we've heard from other people. Things that we've heard from other people. Those can be a huge barrier. Health. Health is a big barrier. If a person's not feeling well, it has an effect on your communication. Emotional responses. Often when you're trying to identify your child's needs, especially it's tough because where that discussion talk about what your child can't do, you're hearing these negative statements, and it can really be difficult for a parent. I often say that when it comes to the emotional piece, if I know I'm going into a meeting and we're going to have a very difficult conversation, I will have things, well, we'll talk more about what we can do for strategies for that. But we can, I imagine that there's a coat hanger outside the door, and that's where I take off my emotional coat and I hang it there so that I can focus on the positives of my child. Um, and another piece of that, when we're having these kind of meetings, is that, wow, medical and educational, the jargon, the disability words, acronyms and words, overwhelming, don't understand. Or if we have a new diagnosis, so different. What does it look like? What is this? Not understanding. Not understanding, fear, intimidation. It's not uncommon. It's common for us to feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of people. I walk in a room, especially at a school meeting. Oh my goodness. I'm the parent, right? I'm walking in, I'm the parent, and I sit down. There's a special education teacher, regular education teacher. There's the speech therapist. There's the physical therapist. An occupational therapist there today. There's the principal of the school that's there. It's like, wow, that's so overwhelming. So we're going to try to give you some useful tools, okay? Because it can become overwhelming. And this is one of these tools that we can use when we're facing a situation where there's a disagreement. And these steps can be really good when they're followed, and that open communication really results in new ideas that everyone can agree to. And it's called luck, okay? And so you may want to write this down. L, capital U, C-K. I'm giving you an acronym now, right? This is luck. So the first one for L would be listen to and restate the other person's opinion. So write that down. Listen to and restate the other person's opinion. We really want to listen to carefully what the other person is saying, and we want to repeat it back to them in your own words, what you think they are saying, just to make sure that you understand, okay? You, very important, use a respectful tone. It's okay to disagree with the other person, but remember to use a respectful tone. And then we have C. So U is use a respectful tone, and then C is compromise or change your opinion if necessary. Sometimes what that other person is saying will change your mind about an issue. So it's okay. It's really okay to compromise, and it's okay to change your opinion if that's necessary. K stands for know and state the reasons for your opinions. Very simple. Know and state the reasons for your opinion. So using that with these steps, this can help you when you're facing something that with a disagreement. That helps result in that open communication, and you may come up with some new ideas that everyone can agree upon. And let me know how that works for you. Luck. Collaborative communication, it can really be useful when working with coworkers. It can be very useful in assessing resources such as vocational rehabilitation or work incentive program plannings or assistance programs. It can also be helpful with inquiring about resources that are on campus or college or tech school. Really and truly, how can you apply luck? Okay, it's key piece. It's if I'm going to give you an example of a real strategy, and I want you to think about it. So Micah's boss is planning an important lunch meeting this Saturday, and Micah has known about the meeting for about a month. And he just realized that the lunch is the same day as his sister's birthday. What can Micah do? So using luck, um, you think about what is it that Micah can do that will change the way things are going, right? So we want to, he may want to go to his boss and use, how would he use those sources, right? It's very important. So he has to think of ways that he can work with his boss. And, so he's going to go talk to his boss and use luck. He is going to restate that the expectation is that he's going to be there at the meeting. And he's going to say to his boss, he can say, after thinking, using it, he's going to say, I'm really honored that my work is really important and that it views, um, the new clients. And he's really, I know you really need me on Saturday and I'm going to be there. And I really appreciate it. So when he talked to his boss said, you can celebrate with her, after lunch. And then, shaking his hands, he's thanking him for listening to him. So when we have that open communication, it really, collaborative communication, it makes a big difference. So coming together, it's just a beginning, and working together for a common goal is progress. It's progress. And good communication, good collaborative communication is really a success, an important piece. Now, if you have enjoyed these 5 presentations, please look up on our website and at www.fndusa.org. And you can find a lot of other resources that would be very helpful to you. Workshops. We do these workshops live. We do them, so we do them in person. We do them one-on-one. We do them on Facebook Live. We do them on YouTube. We have an F&D University on our website that you can go and watch videos at the convenience of your own home. I can remember one time, it's kind of funny, I'm talking about the Facebook Live piece, is that I had somebody, a family member, as a matter of fact, up in Indiana, that watched, I did a workshop on Facebook Live on collaborative communication. And she called me up and she said, "Hey, Suzanne, I want you to know I watched that Facebook Live presentation you did. And I didn't leave a comment." And I said, "Oh, that was okay." And then she says, "But I watched it at 3 a.m. And I was like, "Why are we whispering?" I said, "That's great." I said, "So was it useful?" And she said, "Yes, it was," because she was going to have a meeting for a grandchild with the teacher, and it was going to be very difficult. And she was up in the middle of the night really stressing about it. And so that gave her an opportunity to watch that. But what that did for me too is it also really said to me, reaching families when they need it, how they need it, is a critical piece. So you can watch these workshops. You can request to have them done separately even. We're more than happy to, we come out to doctors' offices and work with the staff. We work with families, we work with schools, wherever that support is needed. So again, I want to thank you for attending this workshop, and I am going to stop recording if I can find it. There it is. There I am. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. And like I said, and you can contact me at Suzanne, Suzanne, at fndfl.org. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you and goodbye.